So here we are today with Tony Moore, who's standing for the
Cedar Fisher
in the
House of Reps.
Yep. In the House of Reps. So up in Queensland here, which is Caloundra.
Yep, Sunshine Coast, divided into north and south, and it's the south end of the Sunshine Coast.
Okay, so Tony's going to talk to us today about his issues. And the first thing I was just going to ask Tony, because a lot of people want to know this kind of stuff, is what is the main difference between UAP, Clive Palmer's party, and Pauline Hanson's party, One Nation? Yeah,
it's a really good question. Sometimes it can be hard to tell. I mean, they're both sort of those warm tonings and colours. I think the easiest way to tell what the difference is now is looking at the preferences of the major parties and going, look, let's look at Liberal Party and where are they preferencing UAP and One Nation, and then also now look at Labor Party, where are they preferencing UAP and One Nation, and look back 6 years and go, where did they preference in them? And back then in my seat, and I'll talk about my seat because I know it well, so 2016 back then, One Nation were considered the very bottom or at the very end of the ballot. And that's on the LNP ticket, and same with Labor, Greens, they all kind of put them there. Generally, I'm always at the end of the Greens ballot. It's a proud moment for me. But in this current election, I was surprised to know that the LNP have actually preferenced them number 2, One Nation number 2, and have put me at number 3. Now, that kind of indicates to me that they see UAP as a greater threat than One Nation. Policy-wise, a lot of the policies are shared. I mean, we're back to basic policies now of freedoms. We've lost things like abortion, euthanasia, marriage. We've lost many of the freedoms, and we're kind of back to one freedom that's left, and that is the freedom to vote. Now, we can say, okay, right now we're in the eye of the storm, which is what I call it, of COVID, and being in the eye of the storm, we have this moment where it feels like things are relaxing just a little. But I had a phone call from a friend in Victoria right now who's actually outside of a hospital right now. He's locked outside of a hospital. His sister has only a couple of days to live, and they won't let him in at all. Now, what kind of a country do we live in where he can, cross the border, head down there, and this is the treatment? And I know under our Constitution, and I hope I get the reference right, but under our Constitution, I think it's section 116. It's in a cluster, 113 to 119. And one of those says that a member of another state or territory shall not be discriminated in any way if they cross the border in another state and territory. And yet here we have this discrimination. So when it comes to the very pointy end of the policies, you'll find that that's where UAP goes, enough is enough. We now have the courage to step in, and we don't have these friendly relationships now with the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. So we're happy to take on more of the people's issues. And I guess, the other question is, why am I running in the UAP after for 10 years being an independent candidate and fighting in that space of independence from the parties and all that kind of thing? And it came down to one very simple answer. It's that after so long, I hadn't actually heard a party or their policy actually talking the people's language. So I adopted the people's language and their voice in my independence from them and started being the spokesperson of that where I could be. But I started hearing it in the UAP at the end of last year. And that's where I went, okay, this is where I need to be, because I can have the greatest impact for the people in a party that allows me to join with them my values and strengths. So it's open enough to accept and embrace me. I'm a conservative person, I'm a faith-believing person, and I'm a freedom fighter. And I have been before freedom was something we had to fight for. Yeah. So that's kind of the short answer, I guess.
Yeah. So COVID's been one of the big things with UAP, hasn't it? I mean, a lot of people have been disgusted by the loss of freedoms and the like. I mean, it's been scary to watch a lot of the reaction. The mainstream media has been a big thing. They've been,
very much so.
Maybe 12 months ago, it was like every night on TV, COVID.
Yep.
And Victoria's been probably the worst there. The Labour-run states have probably been stronger, but I don't think there's been that much difference. So they've all played it. I suppose politics, to an extent, they've been running the policies based on not on what was the science and what was good for people. They've been running it based on the popularity numbers. Will this run well with the voters?
Yeah, I guess they have, but I think even beyond that, it's almost like they're driven by an allegiance outside of this country. Okay, now that to
Surely
me,
not.
that to me is concerning, because now we have as a result of that, $1 trillion debt that now sits on our heads, and most of that money was spent trying to manage COVID, and push out into the public space and go, here's money for that and here's money for that, and give hospitals resources. Yet hospitals prior to COVID had more beds open than during or after COVID, and all that money has been spent. And we wonder, how is that even possible that has come about? And when I look back at the handling of our government, they failed on many levels. So under our constitution, we have protections and powers. For example, again, it's in that cluster, and forgive me that I don't actually remember the exact numbers. My head is full of many things.
We can Google it.
You can Google it, but I can assure you, Section 51 are the instruments of everything that the government can actually make laws on. And then when we hit to 96, 13, 16, 17, and 19, they're all these ones that are our freedoms that are embedded into that constitution. And one of them is that no state nor territory will be able to raise a militia against its own people. And in Victoria, we saw a military deployed and forces deployed shooting rubber bullets at their own citizens who were exercising their right to freedom of assembly and to protest freely.
So you felt that was actually unconstitutional? What
unconstitutional.
What the militia, the people that you're saying were shooting the rubber bullets, they were not part of the normal police force?
They're an extension of all of there's an assembly of a force that has been assembled, drawn from police, drawn from military, drawn from all kinds of resources, who are now acting on the instructions of a parliament and not actually a public service.
Right, so they're more like the definition of a militia.
More like, in my opinion, the definition of a militia. Okay. So that's one example. We also have that we have a right to bodily autonomy, and that no medical procedure can be perpetrated upon you, and yet it was conscripted and rolled out in such a way. And these things are an offence to every Australian, and should be. So I kind of don't agree with the narrative the media spun that this was to protect all people and that all people wanted this. Sure, in the very first few couple of weeks when I started hearing about stuff happening in Wuhan, I'm watching it, but I'm watching it at a distance because I'm like, it's a long way away. And then when the cruise ships started to kind of, manifest its numbers, and then all of a sudden they docked into Sydney, I'm thinking, what a stupid idea that is. Like, honestly.
After they'd had that cruise ship, I think it was in Japan, and we were seeing on the news these people, saying, we're locked down with COVID, and then a cruise ship comes into Sydney with COVID, and it was like, right, everybody off you go.
Correct.
What was all that about? I mean,
I know.
Staggeringly bad this year. Maybe generally with governments, I tend to look, obviously there's malice and things like that, but there's also incompetence. Usually it's incompetence, but in that case, I don't know whether that was. You would think that at that point in time they would have had a bit more of a better plan for managing.
That's so hard to know, and I look at it, and even my own family and my extended family. The first thing I said was, everybody freeze frame. You know that game where you go freeze, everyone just freeze. We don't have the information to make an informed decision or informed choice on anything yet. So just hold frame, be more responsible, be cautious when you're out in public, who you're associating with, etc. And just pull it in a bit tighter for a minute while we get the information. But it was almost the opposite was occurring down there in Sydney. It was like, just let it all rip and just whatever was going to happen.
This has been one of the strange things that you've had in the original thing where going over to the US, you had the Democrats run out states because Donald Trump said, right, no one from China's coming in. And the Democrats were saying, how dare you, that's racist. And then they were rushing down to Chinatown and telling everyone to hug Chinese people. And they would say, look at Donald Trump shutting the borders, how dare he shut the borders for COVID. 3 months later, it's like, Donald Trump's not doing enough, he should be closing down the entire nation, we should all be locked in our homes. So it was very hypocritical.
It isn't. Perspective's hard too, because you have that machinery, as you mentioned, of the media throwing all this information out. And I can actually confirm that the media were doing advertorials almost. They were being paid to run scripts of information and language that was so succinct across all platforms, radio and television and social media.
Richardson Post didn't get any. We had no offers. So.
No offers?
I'm not saying we're less corrupt, but we just had no offers, so the opportunity never arose.
So it is very hard for truth to emerge when it's being drowned in such mechanised strategies of words and information that are actually defrauding the people of truth.
To people who are conspiratorial, there was a lot there to be concerned about.
There was. Look, I know a lot of people who are conspiracy theorists, but in my research, I go back to things like Hansard's, I go back to things like patents, documents, US patents, and I go and start looking, and when I start seeing evidence of things long before the time in which they emerged...
We've covered that on the Richardson post.
Yeah, I now just go, hang on.
It's somewhat, yeah. I mean, look, I don't think that everyone was involved. I think governments were reactive. At the beginning, no one knew what was going on, but in the background, it was like as if there was people pulling little strings, and it was, they got these what were the conferences happening just before the outbreak, we just happened to be wargaming the COVID outbreak, and then 3 months later we have a COVID outbreak, which is you're starting to think.
There is a lot of questions there, and I always look back to that December 17 last year when they opened up Queensland borders, and they opened them up to fully vaccinated, who were fully clear tested.
Yeah.
And prior to that, we had, I think, 7 or 8 deaths and a number of cases that were almost not insignificant, because every case and every person matters, but they were very, very low on the scale of Australia. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, and that's over 2 years, I might add, a 2-year tally, and then within 3 weeks, we had 100,000 people with COVID in Queensland. Yeah. Now tell me, how do fully vaccinated and fully clear tested people, who are the only people allowed into this state, bring that with it?
I believe that the WHO changed the definition of vaccine shortly before shortly after COVID, or before when the vaccines came out, or before they came out. Suddenly they changed the definition of vaccine. If you look it up in an older dictionary, a vaccine is something you take to stop you getting
prevent
disease. Yeah. And suddenly the WHO has got this definition that's like it's something that will reduce the impact once you've been vaccinated.
Yeah.
What strikes me is that, like you mentioned, $1 trillion. I've heard this from Jared Rennick. I saw him speaking. He's got an accountancy background.
Yeah.
He has an accountancy background, and he said there's $1 trillion this has cost us. Now, out of that $1 trillion, how much of that money was spent on research into the whole thing? Like, as in research into ivermectin, for one thing. I mean, there was a lot of promising stuff there. Everyone was like, oh no, it's horse paste and this and that. Yeah. But did we do any studies on that? I mean, a single one?
It's crazy. I mean, even if we just look in Queensland again, and I think the date was 30 April 2020. So here we have 2019 breaks out in Wuhan, and we should have been talking about this, a year ago. This would have been a great. But anyway, here we go. 2019 breaks out early 2020, and we have people in Australia who are now dying from or with COVID, and as a result, those deaths, they're looking for alternatives because there is no vaccine on the horizon. It's going to be another 8-9 months away, if that. We also have very little things, and the Queensland government put in a directive to ban the use of hydroxychloroquine.
I remember the speech, and the guy was saying it's because we don't want people who need this medicine for other things to go without. And the same with ivermectin.
Which is interesting because Clive Palmer bought a personal massive supply of millions of dollars, and he gifted it, or offered the gift to them to use, so that there wouldn't be no shortage of supply. But it just makes me concerned that as a citizen of Queensland, that a potential solution or a potential treatment is taken off the table because they don't want to interfere with what?
Not just taken off the table, it's actually made illegal.
It's made illegal,
They actually made it illegal. Correct. So if my doctor had prescribed me with ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, they would have been facing a $14,000 fine at the beginning, and I think as well being struck off the medical register.
So look, I think this lays the groundwork for, personally, an inquiry down the track, a very big one, and I would like to see that happen, and I hope I'm part of that.
You just got my vote.
So yeah.
Well, you know what? Issue alone.
Yeah, I mean, as Australians and Queenslanders and the people in my electorate, they deserve the truth, and I don't want the truth to be costly because it's already cost us so much. The absence of truth, but the truth needs to come out, and those responsible need to be brought to justice. Yeah. And what does justice look like in that space? I'm not sure, but I've termed it lately, we have a whole new horizon of of issues that we're now facing that never existed prior. We have a new season of horizons, and we now need new policies from new thinkers and new people in order to deliver better solutions. Because I look at ALP and LNP right now, and they're dragging out the same old solutions of 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and 6 years ago. And they think it's going to be the same solution. In my area, we're going to give you roads and rail. Like we forgot about the last 2 years. We haven't forgotten. The people have not forgotten.
And Labour are saying, look what Scott Morrison's doing, cost of living, this and that, with schools,
it's all cost of living.
Bridges, and It's like, these are the people who just steered us through 2 years. And to be fair, like at the beginning, no one knew what was going on. They were overly cautious. Probably in hindsight, they were probably overly cautious. Having said that, I think that the early strains of COVID seem to have been were quite shocking. Yeah.
Well, I had COVID in the first round.
Okay, right. Yeah.
So I got it right up front. Okay. Very, very quickly.
You were in Queensland?
I was in Queensland. And it was an outbreak on the Sunshine Coast, and I got it. And so, as any responsible citizen would do, I quarantined myself. Yeah. I don't need a law to do it. Yeah. I don't need a law. We know that if you're not well, you stay at home. And for me, it was 24 hours. It was a rough 24 hours. But I have underlying health conditions. I have, respiratory issues and things like that, asthma and whatnot. Yeah. So I am the kind of person who actually it was going to be bad for, and I just bounced straight back up. So that was when I first went, hang on, okay, something...
How did you actually got tested for it?
I didn't get tested for it, no. They didn't even have tests for it back then.
You knew it's COVID.
It was COVID, all right, yeah. You ring up the hotline and they go through the process.
Right.
And they go, yes, okay. But they didn't care as soon as they realised I was towards the end and I'd quarantined.
Right.
If I had just got it and I hadn't, they wanted to know everything. Of which, because I'm a very private person, would say, I'm sorry, because I also would manage the people whom I've been in contact with as well, as a responsible person should. But, when, again, we look at all of that, and if we jump all the way forward now, we've got all these political parties right now saying, vote for me, here's $250 that we're going to help lower the cost of living. But what I loved about my party is they are right on the money with this. They go, here's $1 trillion debt. And this was even a month ago, even before that. We have $1 trillion debt. And unless we actually deal with this debt, the pressure on our system is going to spike up petrol prices. It is going to spike in unemployment, and I'll come back to unemployment in a minute. And it's also going to increase inflation, housing costs. And they said, so we have to deal with that. Now, the alternative parties, and I'm going to call them the alternative parties, right? Because I believe there are only two parties now that you should be voting for: United Australia Party and One Nation. I think you should be boycotting any of the other parties. So all the majors and the Greens, just boycott them. But United Australia Party said, we're going to deal with the debt, not by the Australian people paying for this over 184 years, as is the current plan, of which I will add, the budget is only set for 6 months and not 3 years. So that's a flag in itself. But by doing this, we're not going to let the Australian people pay for it. We're going to put an excise of 15% on iron ore, and Australia is one of the largest providers of iron ore, something in the vicinity of 80 to 90%, to mainly a Chinese market who need it in order to keep their products running out the door. So China will pay for our debt. And that not only pays for our debt, but gives an opportunity to say, anyone who's a student who has a HECS loan, we can actually remove that HECS debt. We can also remove your student loans. And we can do things like, for the first $30,000 that you earn and pay on your home loan to reduce your interest rate and your repayments, will be tax-free. Now, all of a sudden, that's a different frame, isn't it? And then you go, but because 5 years from now, we've got a threat of interest rates going into double digits. Actually, that's 3 years, can I tell you? So I've looked at the forecasts. It's a global forecast that all the banks look at the same information, and I've been over them. 3 years from now, 3 years and 3 months actually, that's when we'll cross into double digits, and then inflation, by 5 years,
interest rates.
This is the interest rates. This is the interest rate. Double digits.
So those guys who've got $800,000 mortgages are going to be paying $80,000.
Well, what was the interest rate rise just yesterday or 2 days ago? 0.3, 0.25, 0.35. Sorry, we don't know exactly what that is.
Google it.
Yes, do your due diligence and go find out. But what I can tell you is, for a standard or an average home loan in Australia, that's $65 a month extra. Okay. Now that means the $250 the LNP are going to give you as over the next 3 years, which is 22 cents a day, will only cover you for about 4 months, and then you're back to paying it all yourself.
Look, the government's handing out money is like, always, like anyone that's listening, always vote for the guy that promises to give you the least money, because if they're going to give you money, they have to take it off you, and they're going to flip the ticket on the way along. So if they're going to give you $1, they've got to take $1.20 off you while you're not looking in some way or other.
Well, I mean, they were talking even just recently, actually just this week, and they're talking about, they're actually very critical of the other UAP policy, which is the 3% fixed, and that's for 5 years, because we know the next 5 years are going to be critical for Australian people. And think about this. 100% of the current loans that are written, that's everybody, obviously, because it's 100%, 100%, if they were fixed for 3%, when it hits 3% for 5 years, that will stabilise every homeowner and lower the risk of having people foreclosing and homelessness. I was shocked the other day. I was in the park doing a meet and greet, and this lady just comes up and she says, "What are you doing for homeless people?" And you get it asked every now and then. Now, I've worked with the homeless, and I've worked in child safety, I've worked in lots of areas. And I said, "Tell me the situation." And she said, I'm in tears because my children's friends, their mother can no longer afford to rent and is now homeless. And she's trying to modify her vehicle so that her 4 children and her can sleep in it. And she said, it's not just them. I now have friends of mine who also have people who are homeless in their street. Now, homelessness used to be something rare, and it used to be something that...
In Australia.
Rare in Australia, yes.
We've got 25 million people in a continent that it takes 5 hours to fly across.
Yeah. And it was as a result of the fact that we are the lucky country. We do have a lot of wealth and opportunity. But the thing that's happened here is that homelessness is now in our street. It's around our corners. They will be in your suburb. How do we deal with that if we have interest rates going into double digits, and we have inflation, and we have joblessness and high petrol prices?
Now, I'm going to throw I don't know, a spanner in the works, or ask a tough question. How do you how do you cap interest rates at 3%?
Okay. I know, it's a criticism that's been made and levelled, and it's fairly made and levelled. But let me tell you this. In any policy, you need 2 things. 2 things help. The first thing you need is the power to do it. Section 151 of the Constitution gives you the power to do that. You also need precedent. So after the war, 1940s, that's when the government did it last time. They froze interest rates in order to protect what was going to happen and stop falling into this recession and try and stabilise the economy, which is no different to when we have an emergency scenario like what we've just gone through.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that to cap interest rates, the mechanism for capping interest rates or for altering interest rates, when the government says, hey, we're going to put interest rates, or the central bank says we're going to put interest rates up by 1%, whatever, they don't just put out a thing saying, right, everybody, interest rates are now at 1%. They actually have to go into the markets and interfere in the markets, and they do that usually when they lower interest rates. They have to basically print money, and when they raise interest rates, they actually take money back in.
Using bonds and
in the bond market. So go into the bond auctions and do that. So in order to cap interest rates, if the market's saying interest rates should be higher and you want to lower interest rates, you're going to need to print money. So I'm not saying directly, we're not directly printing money, but there's
essentially, but look what happened in COVID. They basically just printed money.
Don't even get me started.
But they basically printed money. So what I'm saying is the risk to Australian people great enough that we have to create new ways to manage it? And that's what I admire about United Australia's policy here, is that this is a new way. Now, you'll have noticed this week that both Labor and Liberal have come out with their own versions of it. I think Labor's is the equity home market, where they want to partner with you in owning your home.
I can't wait, please.
So they will give you 40%, whatever it is, but they own it. So tell me, we already have Crown on our deed, electronic deed, and now your name and what, ALP as well? I don't think so. So I guess what I do like, though, is that with a new environment, we get new ideas on the table. And 3% fixed for 5 years is a great place to start for home loans that are already in play, and that will stabilise the market. It will keep the pressure off average families. The last thing we want is lots of people unemployed, no homes, and children. I mean, I work in child safety. I can see the mechanisms when child safety shoots through the roof. I know how these things interplay, and we have to be broader than that in our thinking and not just looking after our party interests as the majors have always done.
This is the problem, that these people are just seem devoted to the party. It's like we don't care if the party loses power as long as we're still in control of the thing. You know? It's like the uni party, as they call it. There's two parties that practically work together. What's the word someone said the other day?
Well, it's really, I mean, it is now a coalition of corrupt people. Really, it's always been a duopoly, but I would argue now that it's more a monopoly. Because now you've got Labor and Liberal in some places preferencing each other to cut out competition.
I think they've always tended to do that. Like the way that they've made alterations to the whole electoral system.
They have, absolutely.
In deliberately to cut out, and especially at the moment because they've seen that they're on the nose. The big parties on the nose. There's more and more people who are looking at independence because the big parties have sold them down the river, and people get the feeling of that. You know? I mean. I always say Liberal are better than Labour personally. I mean, and I say that as someone who used to vote. I grew up voting Labour. My parents voted Labour. I always voted Labour. But when I got old enough to realise what was going on, I figured it out. As you get older, a lot of people go through this transformation. You realise, hang on a sec, that these aren't the nice people who are just giving money away.
That's right.
Where did they get that money from? So these are people who are. It's the old Pinocchio thing where you think these guys are your friends, but then you find out they're pinning a tail on you, and the next thing, you're pulling a cart.
Yep. And they've been manipulating the system. Like, for example, now your viewers might be a bit more educated than the average Australian voter.
I'd like to think.
But most voters believe they're voting for a PM. Okay. And those who don't think they're voting for a PM, they think they're voting for a party. When in actual fact, our Constitution, and would you be surprised to know, in our Constitution, the underlying document of this country that actually establishes the sovereignty of the people over Parliament and politicians, doesn't mention parties.
No.
Not at all. No. So there's no reference to the mechanism of parties, and yet in everything else, Electoral Act, parties are mentioned, I think, 108 times in the Electoral Act. Now tell me, how can we have a constitution that doesn't mention them a single time and an electoral act that mentions them 108 times and gives them favour? What kind of favour? Let's think of the Senate ballot, the long white one at the very top. Think white sky, clouds. On the Senate ballot, if you are not grouped, an independent per se, if you're an independent, you'll be down the very far end because you don't get the priority of being a party or grouped candidate. Right down the other end, and only below the line. So on the ballot where it says you can vote one of two ways, 6 above or 12 below, you can't. You can only vote below if you're going for an independent. And only 95% of the population vote above. And so you cannot win from below if you're an independent. Now that is where they start manipulating and taking little tiny, I won't call them graces, I'll call them abuses, away from the public. And then if you're an independent, you don't get a logo above like everyone else in a party does. And these things aren't fair, and they're not just. And our people deserve better than that.
Yeah. But the people who we want to change this are the parties. So how's it going to change? Yeah.
Well, a classic one that everyone, and we've often spoken about things with the public. They talk about, where are your preferences going? You hear it all the time. I mean, I get it often. Where are your preferences going? Let me be very, very clear. Prior to 2016, we had a thing called a group voting ticket. Now, a group voting ticket was where it only operated in the Senate, so not in the lower house, only in the Senate. A group voting ticket was where a party would sit there and go, right, anyone who puts a 1 in our box, and back then you only had to put a 1 in the box only. Now, you must do 6, minimum 6 above the line. But you'd put a 1, and the party's chosen where your vote's going to go. They've chosen the journey, and that's how they were able to get people elected all the time. And it was Ricky Moore from the Motorist Party who actually got elected on such a small percentage that they went, we're not having that again. And in the 11th hour before the 2016 election, they changed the voting laws. Yeah. And they did it in such a way that it removed that. But since then, people say, where are your preferences going? And the truth is, and it says it on each ballot, Senate ballot, lower house ballot, it actually says number 1 to 6 in the Senate, number 6 above the line or 12 below, in the order of your choosing. And on the lower house, it says of your choosing. So a preference or a how to vote card is a suggestion of those people who don't know what they're doing or haven't researched the candidates.
Okay, so getting Constitution, just quickly touch on the big push at the moment by the powers that be seems to be to bring in this voice, the Aboriginal voice to Parliament and things like that.
Yep.
What's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so once again, I'm very much about the Constitution. So we have to think about it in, again, fairly and equitably. Okay, so the Indigenous people do need a voice in Parliament. However, is it lawful, is it fair to have a voice in Parliament that isn't elected by the people? And our Constitution, in section...
Google it.
I think it's 152, but I apologise again, lots of these things. But it is basically the last section of the Constitution, and it actually talks about the sovereignty of the people, and that is the people that choose the lower house, the people alone that choose the upper house. Now, because of that, that means if the Indigenous voice needs to be larger than what it is, then the people need to choose that. And I saw on the Senate for the first time, I think it could be, though I could be wrong with that, but there was actually an Indigenous group of candidates running, and I actually commend that, because if you want that voice, you have to be lawfully elected with that. Now, that's not to say that the Indigenous people in, say, my seat of Fisher should not be represented by me, because when I'm elected, I will be representing them because they're part of my seat.
That's right.
And that's how representative governance is meant to be, but we've been hijacked. The Constitution is like this. It says the people will choose a candidate, the people will give the candidate the policy, and then the candidate, they'll get them elected, and that candidate will represent the people and be the people's voice in the Parliament. But what's happened, we've been hijacked by Labor and Liberal, and I say Labor and Liberal because that's who's hijacked us. And they go, here is our candidate, here is our policy, here is your how to vote card, go and do your job. And they've disenfranchised us.
We, the people, are not getting what we're supposed to.
We aren't. So the voice of the Indigenous is important, but not one that is actually inserted into the Parliament. It needs to be elected to the Parliament.
Well, yeah, every Aboriginal person has a vote. Now, the fact that Aboriginal people make up 2% of the population,
yep.
And it depends. Again, it depends on how you define an Aboriginal person. Now, this is something that I think should be is being ignored. What is an Aboriginal person? So, if you're 50% Aboriginal, are you Aboriginal, or is it just a full-blooded person? If you're 1/64th Aboriginal, are you Aboriginal? So there should be,
it's very hard to define because it's now based down around identifying.
Yeah, that's right.
And
I could go into an Aboriginal tribe and sit down and I don't know, smoke a peace pipe or whatever we do, and they say, "Hey, you're Aboriginal," and suddenly I'm Aboriginal. It's like, how does that work? That's, to me, this is a con job, because they've got a whole bunch of people who are not Aboriginals who are identifying as Aboriginals, and I think that these are people who are driving this voice. I don't know if you're aware of Josephine Cashman. She sometimes writes for our site, and she's an Aboriginal person. She's a lawyer, an ex-lawyer, and she was on a number of very high-level committees with John Howard and the like, and looking into the voice. And she is dead set against it, and she actually traipsed around Australia meeting with Aboriginal people and getting their views on it, and they're all like, "What voice? What's this? We've not been. No one's consulted them. The people that are pushing this voice are not Aboriginal."
Yeah, and it does concern me because they have met in Northern Territory, and they came up with the treaty and all these different things. But when I've spoken with the Indigenous community, they're like, well, they're not speaking on behalf of me. And it's sort of like there are Christian groups as well that act on behalf of Christians, and I hear Christians say they're not acting on my behalf. And then there's people who are interested in the environment, and they're going, well, I'm not part of the climate people over there, but I'm concerned with the environment.
And so, you know what, when I was younger, I'm going to admit this, and people will probably hate me for it, but when I was younger, I voted Green up to the point when they got into Parliament. And I think it was Bob Brown was the first one in there, and as soon as he got in, I didn't hear anything about the environment from him. He was just a basic Marxist. He's like, you're hating the country, we want refugees, we want this, we want that. I was like, well, hang on a second, whether someone wants that or not, that's not you were elected to look after the environment. Why are you suddenly talking about George Bush and what he's doing and this and that? It's like,
and this is that hijacking.
Hijacking.
Yeah. So we are voting for people without knowing what that person is, and if I can sum all of that stuff into one thing that's most important for an elector, when you're voting, look at a party, look at their policy, but do not make the decision on those things alone, because on the most important policies that will impact you the greatest in our parliament, they will be made on a person's conscience vote. And there's no point sending Mr. Brown in there thinking he's going to look after this when he does that. So you want to know what people are all about. I'm fortunate. I've been in this for 10 years. I've been the same since the beginning as I am now, and I'm unmovable. I have not budged on my core principles and values, which actually serve the community without bias, without discrimination, without donors too, and without money. Now, if you're listening and you got money, don't give it to me because I cannot be bought. Give it to him instead.
I mean, I wouldn't. I'm not interested in money. If I've got a roof over my head and enough to eat and a little bit extra, that's fine with me. I'm not one of these people that's out here to make $1 squillion. But yeah. Okay, so free speech,
yes,
the killer of society, or is this a white man's obsession, as they said recently?
Well, free speech is actually the foundation again, and it's embedded in our constitution, and particularly around ideas. If we don't have the...
Hang on. Where is it embedded in our constitution?
Oh, if you look at the preamble, which is actually the setup for the constitution, it explains why it's so important that we actually have representatives who freely, fiercely, they often call it frank and fiercely, actually speak the people's voice. And then that puts it in a context of ideas in Parliament. And then if it's not being colluded, you actually get good people testing ideas.
That's the mandating free speech for the Parliament, which is they do this in the Parliament in the UK is the same. You have parliamentary privilege. Anyone can say anything. It's free speech. They're absolute free speech fanatics.
Parliamentary privilege
in the Parliament.
Yeah.
But then they go, right, but the rest of you,
this
free speech thing, we don't like that. So
and it's stuff. Look, I mean, I'm banned off Facebook, and I have been numerous times.
Badge of honour, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, they were dead to me, can I say? But anyway, I've been banned. The one that got me the most banned was actually posting TGA data sheets and posting ABS data sheets. So it wasn't my own words. It was actually a data sheet that was
there. You
there.
were telling the truth.
I was putting the truth in his face. They did not want it. Now, on the alternative, I look at it and I go, well, should we shut down Facebook? Now, I personally would love that. But that is also not free speech now, is it?
Yeah.
But what do we do with those organisations and entities that are controlling the message or the conversation in the public space? Now, is it right that the media is able to be manipulated and used by governments to put a message into that society, and then anyone who opposes that is considered a villain, a liar, a deceiver, a cheat, and then the majority adopt that, and then these people are out? I don't think that's right either. If ideas are free, we should both be free. Everyone should be free to speak those ideas into that public space.
There's an argument around that, because running the Richardson Post, we have a comment section which is pretty wild down there.
I can imagine.
Guys, and we try to give as much free speech as we can, but there's obviously, as like what you say, a private company. I mean, for one, it's mostly we have an obligation, legal obligations. Like I don't want to get sued. So what people say, that's for one thing. For another thing, I don't want the conversation to spiral out and become. I don't want. I try to avoid people in the comment section. What I want to avoid is people just having horrible arguments with each other and calling each other, abusing each other, and just you're this, you're that. I want a free exchange of ideas. So we don't have complete free speech in the comment section. Because if you do, it just turns into a
and also you become liable as a publisher.
So there's this private company thing, but at the same time there's an abuse of that where, this goes back in the US in the 50s or 60s, the Jim Crow era. Companies argued that, look, we're not going to allow black people into our business, but we're a private business, we can do that. And the Supreme Court struck that down and said, no, look, I don't care, you're a private business, you still have to abide by community standards.
Yep.
And the big tech companies have really brought that back in and said, oh, no, we're private companies, we can do pretty much what we want. Now, in the Richardson Post, we try and be as transparent as we can. Unless people are really being a pain in the butt, we'll try and avoid banning them. But if they push it too far, and there's certain things like doxing people, we're very anti-doxing. But it is a bit of a tightrope. But with free speech, essentially, when someone gives an opinion, they should have a right to give that opinion without being actually arrested or losing their job or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, losing your spot on a public platform. The other thing around that is once you start censoring people on your platform, you become kind of like a publisher because you're deciding what's said and what isn't.
Yes, that's how they're trying to make it stitched up. Yeah, that way.
So that becomes difficult. Then it's just it is a little bit of a tough one, but it has been a lot of abuse. But I must admit, I am so happy to see Elon Musk buying Twitter.
Yeah, I might actually get a Twitter account back.
Maybe, yeah. I heard someone just tried to get one on there and got kicked straight off again. So I think that the people in charge are still in charge as yet. But I'm not a 100% Musk fan, Elon Musk fan. He had his snout in the public trough a little bit, but I kind of like him. He's kind of a Donald Trump kind of a figure where he likes to go in there, and if someone has a go at him, he's like, right, you've given it to me, I'm going to give it back 10 times.
Yeah.
And actually, I know for a lot of people, like, oh, that's disgusting. You shouldn't do this. I actually quite enjoy it. I like that sort of robust. Jump in the thing, and like you're not punching someone in the face. You're actually just someone's being an ass, and you insult them. It's like, well, you shouldn't have been an ass,
I just got an email before I came down here from someone in my electorate who had sent me an email asking my thoughts on all of these things, and I just put it back and just put links to different things. I said, look, if you do your research, you'll find this, this, and this. Here's the links. And she wrote back and said, that's quite rude. I found that very rude. And I said, look, I apologise that I'm rude, putting it that way, but I believe that you should be actually and take ownership over your responsibility to do your own research. Before you ask, because there's 100 and something thousand people in my electorate. That's a lot of emails to individually respond to, of which I don't have the time to. Yeah,
but people with free speech doesn't mean a freedom to demand that we have access to your platform, or we expect you to write a 60-page letter back to me when I ask you a question. So,
I always respond in kindness. I mean, if we go back just, you would see the Israel Folau situation that occurred, and that was around free speech, where he had a right to speak freely, but now they were trying to put in laws to actually say you can only speak freely about some things, which is the religious discrimination bill, to help faith-based schools that have a Bible that says certain things in it, that if they read that out, they're now discriminating and need to be arrested and locked up. I mean, where are we now, and how the heck did we get there?
That's right, yeah. I mean, if they hadn't interfered with free speech in the first place, they wouldn't need to be trying to pass laws to put free speech back in. Free speech is one of those absolutist things. It's like virginity. You can't be partly a virgin. You can't have partly free speech. As soon as you allow the government to start making laws around free speech about what you can say and you can't say, it's like the thin end of a wedge that just, the camel's nose in the tent, whatever. As soon as you do that, you're gone. So Scott Morrison said, "Oh, well, we'll pass. We've passed this law, and now this bogeyman's come, and we're going to pass this other law to try and paper over. You're sticking band-aids all over." They
literally are. Yeah.
It's just a cluster flip.
Yeah, and you got to watch the periphery. When they put bills through, there's all these amendments to other bills. And if you get enough amendments to other bills from all different independent bills, you can actually you can change the fundamental meaning of another piece of legislation vicariously that then needs to be corrected. So these issues are significant, and I kind of feel that this is our last election where we will actually have a free election where we can freely vote and we can freely. I think the next time round it might be very different if we do not swing and change this parliament for something else.
All right, well, getting on to that, election integrity. I mean, it's been a big thing in America. They had the most the greatest election integrity in history in 2020, according to the mainstream media.
Yeah.
Other people want to disagree. How do you think that election integrity is in Australia?
Okay, so we have an advantage and a disadvantage to America. Our system is not electronic, it is still manual, so it's paper-based. However, let's say in your electorate here, what's your electorate? Brisbane. So in Brisbane, you probably have 33 seats that would be booths around your seat here. That means there's 33 paper books with everyone's name from this electorate. And you could technically go in and vote 33 times, and at no time will they be able to recognise which one is the real you, unless those books are all coordinated, which they'll do later on, and they'll go, hang on, Harry, you voted 33 times. You are only allowed to vote once, as our constitution says. You can only vote once in each election, because it's 2 elections, Senate and lower house. But this is where it gets complicated. They go, because we don't know which is the real you, we can't remove 33 votes.
Do you need to provide ID? I can't remember.
Look, yes, you should be providing driver's license and visual ID and all of those kinds of things. But technically, being a paper-based system, it's open for abuse. Now, I'm not saying that happens, but I'm saying
potentially it could.
There's no mechanism to stop it. Now, we can bank online, and we can do Medicare online, and we can do our tax and everything online, all fully verified, yet we can't actually vote online. And here's one of the reasons why. Because they want to funnel you through a corridor where people who have all the numbers, as in red and blue, have the most number of people who can hand you a voting card, of which steers the election result. And those mechanisms are designed. So in my electorate, we have polling booths that are open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Right? It's a 12-hour day of voting that we have to man and resource. Yeah. How does an independent person do that?
That makes things pretty tough.
It makes it difficult.
I get that, but at the same time, internet, as we've seen with the American thing, there was a huge thing around those voting machines. Lots of people lost a lot.
That's those voting machines. So we don't use those machines here.
Yeah, but even the internet, it's just data. Once it gets digitized.
Data's tough.
Is easy to manipulate. It's
and then you can't identify because under the law,
it would be very hard to if you're going to jiggle around with an election. I believe it would be much harder to jiggle around with paper votes than an electronic system.
Now that probably brings me to the biggest concern is that, remember, in the Constitution we don't have any mention of parties. Yet when it comes to collecting or counting the votes, and on Anthony Green's ABC, it's always two-party preferred, two-party preferred, two-party preferred. Everything is every media article, two-party preferred basis, two-party preferred basis. But our Constitution doesn't refer to parties, it refers to candidates. Yeah. And even in the counting house, it's meant to be two-candidate preferred. So the parties are irrelevant, but they are nearly always red and blue. So in 2013, the seat of Fairfax, up my way, that was actually when Clive Palmer ran against a guy called Ted O'Brien from LNP. And what happened is the counting began, and they opened their envelope on a two-candidate basis, but then counted red and blue. Okay, now they were the two candidates, or technically, but because it's a two-party mentality, that's what they did. Now, as you're counting, and the scrutineers are there, remember, big parties have lots of scrutineers. Unfortunately, fortunately for United Australia Party, they had scrutineers there. And what they were seeing is they were only counting red and blue. They weren't interested in the yellow party at all. And that's when the lawyers came in and said, stop, it says two candidate preferred, and this pile that you're discarding here is equal to one of those two piles. Therefore, it looks like it should be these two candidates. And they said, yes, we're going to count yellow and blue. And before that, it had been deemed that it was going to be actually an LNP win, right? Even on Anthony Green's thing, even in the polling booth, it was going to be an LNP win. When they did the recount, it was a United Australia Party win by about 100 votes, maybe less. Okay, so that brings me to this point that it's all these little micro things that have been used that actually give advantage to some, disadvantage to others.
Very hard to break through that two-party thing.
And only we, the people, only we can actually push against it. And even my own campaign people, they often say, how are we going to guarantee a fair election? I'm like, we can't guarantee a fair election. I can't guarantee that for you. But what I can do is this. I see an election much like a race. And I know if I'm running a sprint, there may be drug cheats there. And I could whinge, I could complain, I could raise a flag and go, this is unfair, this is wrong, or I could outperform them. Yeah. And what I'm saying to the Australian people is they need to outperform by getting smarter, choosing who they're going to vote, and put the others last. It's the only way to break the stranglehold. So paper-based is better, but with the exception of a few things. Yeah. And unfortunately, until the people can claim back the control and stop getting how to vote cards off people, do their research and walk in and know. And hopefully that's this election.
Can they get how to vote cards for Palmer online? I'm guessing that they can.
They will. Most will be online, but it's really quite simple. Let's say I'm not a candidate and I'm just a voter. I did this in the election of 2016 on the Senate. That was a double dissolution, so we had 12 seats up for grabs. There was 122 candidates across the top, 122, and there were 28 single issue parties. So you're only voting for one thing, and that's it. 122 candidates. I went through and looked at which are the ones that align to my personal values, and I only found 22 below the line scattered about. Now that tells me, for example, remember that was the election that decided gay marriage. Okay, it was that election. Now if we look at that and we put one up against LNP, they had 8 candidates below, and only 2 of them supported marriage, and the rest didn't. So most people were told from other lobby groups and stuff, put a 1 there, they'll protect it. But they actually didn't, because we didn't look closely enough. So we have to kind of sharpen that up and work out the candidates.
So what's your website? What website should people go to if they're interested in your policies and information?
So I have my own platform. It's www.tonymore.info, as in information.
More is spelled
Moore, as in like James Bond.
Right.
And then obviously on the United Australia Party there, you go to Fisher, and I'm all there too. So, yeah.
All right. Cool. So I think we'll wrap it up there.
Awesome.
Thanks
Harry.
cheers.
Appreciate the time.